This is a Word Within International production with Gail Knox, covering the book of John.
This is an inductive Bible study, and there's where we want to start, is what is inductive Bible study? Basically, it's starting with the particulars and expanding them to the general. Deductive, on the other hand, would be what then? See, we already have a little test here. If inductive is starting with particulars and expanding to the general, what would deductive be? Starting with the general and coming down to the specifics, right? Inductive then is going to involve word-by-word study, line by line. It's going to be studying all of the context. And when you study all of the context, we're talking about the immediate context, we're talking about the context of the chapter, we're talking about the context of the entire book, and we're talking about the context of the entire Bible. We have to understand anything we're reading based on all of that. And this is going to mean that we let the Scriptures interpret Scripture. In this class, we don't use commentaries. We don't use what the preacher said last Sunday. We don't use footnotes in our study Bibles. We don't, or try not to even use what we've learned in the past. That's where I get into the most trouble, because I learned a lot of stuff growing up that I now realize was about as far from the truth as you could get. And so we have to keep our minds open. You're looking at me rather flat right now. Does anybody understand what I'm saying? You know, we have a lot of these myths that have been indoctrinated. We've been indoctrinated by these myths that we need to try to just be open-minded, read the Scriptures, and let the Scriptures say what they say, and kind of keep these other opinions out of it until we've adequately studied it. There is an advantage in studying the book of John or the Gospel of John, and that is most of us are very familiar with it. That's also a disadvantage, because if you're very familiar with it, you've heard lots of teachings on it, and you probably have formed some opinions already. So again, those are things we want to just kind of put up on the shelf and try to be very, very objective until we've had a chance to investigate it thoroughly ourselves. Those of you who have been with us a long time or been with precept upon precept a long time before me, or even came from it last year or something, you know that sometimes when you really study the Scripture in depth, it says more than you ever realized that it said. It says things that are not what I call the popular teaching. And so that's what we're trying to get to. And you will find that you become your own commentator. You become, over the years, you become good enough at doing this that, quite frankly, I would take my opinion frequently over the opinion of any of the commentaries I pick up. So you don't gain that overnight, but after a while you start realizing you know how to study that Bible well enough, and you can see where somebody else hasn't bothered to do that. I can't tell you how many thoughts are out there that simply conflict with another part of Scripture. Now, we've got a problem when that happens, right? Because the Bible tells us that all Scripture is God-breathed. All Scripture comes out of the mouth of God. God is truth. The Bible tells us that. It tells us Jesus is truth. That means that God is truth. They're one and the same. It also tells us that God cannot lie in one place. In another place it said God does not lie. So everything that comes out of His mouth is truth. The Bible comes out of His mouth. That's what 2 Timothy 3:16 says. So it has to be truth. If we find a teaching that is contradicted by another part of the Bible, what do we know then? Somebody's interpretation is incorrect. It's as simple as that. If when you're reading and you find a Scripture that contradicts another part of the Bible from the one you're reading right then, what do you know? You're misinterpreting it, and you need to go back to the books and figure out where you went off base, okay? And that's the key to inductive study, is you're just pulling from all over Scripture and letting that tell you what this one means right here. And we're going to give you an example of that in just a little bit here.